everyone, welcome back to Kevin Reviews. I just recently watched for the first time Brightburn. Yes, a kind of another superhero movie, but this is a superhero horror movie or a super horror movie, as I would probably say. But in any case, this is by Sony Films, along with their other other production companies, including Screen Gems, Stage Six Films, and the H Collection. This is directed by David Yer- Yarovesky. I'm probably butcher that. This is written by Brian Gunn and Mark Gunn, and produced by James Gunn, so all related. Brian and Mark are cousins. But in any case, so we have the cast, including mainly, and I'm going to use mainly because there's three main characters in this. We have Elizabeth Banks, David Denman, and Jackson A. Dunn, who is the biggest star in the film as Brandon um, Brandon Breyer. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to make sure I get my names right, and I feel like I second guess myself. So he's Brandon Breyer. He's basically the super um, horror film. The Superman of the film. Um, so I remember because everything with the MCU, the DCEA extended universe, everything was superhero, everything was coming out, and there were times where people thought of the idea of what if we have a superhero movie that's mainly a horror film? And granted, there has been some that try to do that, or not enough to be like considered a horror film, but like films like even Blade and Ghost Rider that dealt with like horror esque type creatures like vampires and demons and stuff like that. It doesn't go that far enough to be considered horror, because it's still try to you know stay with the PG-13 crowd, or roughly are still be fun and action packing mostly, because that's what often comic book heroes were at the time. As for Superman, there has been comic iterations of the story, involving an evil Superman, not necessarily horror related, though I think there was one involving zombies, but I'm not 100% certain. I believe so, though. I mean, we have Marvel zombies, especially out nowadays. But I mean, the one that comes to mind is Injustice Superman, who is Superman who lost Lois and his son because of what the Joker did to him. Um, that he kills the Joker, and then he tries to become the one world government, the act who rules the world basically. And then of course recent shows like with Homelander from The Boys and Omni Man from Invincible. And I have not seen either series, so I can't really compare and contrast either of them. But yeah, there's been times where we've often thought, what if Superman was the villain? Or even some of the other heroes, what if they were villains? Or but that's the thing, what if they were villains, but not necessarily about what if they were the horror main antagonist in a horror film. And I admit that from the trailers look good. They look kind of interesting about the idea. um Admittedly, it does feel like it is a slasher film, because we already know who these exactly, um you know who Brandon is supposed to represent, but as well as he's going to be the killer. But I guess the question is where did he come from that makes him land on Earth and then do all these things, these horrendous things. And that was kind of the mystery. What is this character about? What is his backstory? And yeah, unfortunately, the film did kind of had a mixed bag, because either people weren't ready for a horror superhero film, um, that kind of blurs the line. Even critics and audiences are pretty split on it. And after watching it, well, here's my review of 2019's Brightburn. So the story goes in Brightburn is that Tori and Kyle Breyer, played by Elizabeth Banks and David Denman, are trying to conceive a child. Apparently there are some problems. It's not explained, but they're trying really hard to, conceive a child until a child comes to them in the form of a space pod that lands in Brightburn, Kansas. It's very similar to how Clark Kent Superman lands in Smallville, Kansas. So in any case, they found him, they raised him. Um, does kind of beg the question on whether or not other people have tried to look for this pod, or that happened, that fell out of the sky, but whatever. So they raised him. Everything all seems all fine until Brandon reaches his 12th birthday, and then he starts hearing voices from the pod, and and then he starts changing his personality, his outlook on everyone, how everyone treats him, how he views the world, somewhat. Um, but in any case, he starts becoming evil and sadistic to the point where he hurts people. He kills animals. He does all these horrendous things, and of course, he adopts a super kind of like a super villain persona, um, that doesn't have a persona established yet, but it's getting there. So now it's up to Tori and Kyle to figure out how to either stop him or reason with him, or understand what he's going through. And I can see why this is pretty split. It's a nice idea to explore, but I don't think it goes as far. I think the film wanted to more like try to be more of a horror film, but even because this feels much more like a slasher horror film. We know who the killer is, um, and it. And again, I mentioned this before. I'm not a big into slasher films, so but I mean there are some ideas that I think could have been established more. But the one thing that really bothered me, or I wish that could have explored more, is the relationship with the Breyer family. Aside from a montage of them growing up, raising Brandon, um, they're not exactly great parents, Tori and Kyle. Especially when Brandon starts realizing his powers, and they don't even know that or yet, or they don't really tell him. They seem oblivious, especially Tori, who's kind of really stupid and oblivious to all the stuff that's been happening. But sometimes their messages don't exactly feel great. I mean, no parent is perfect, but still, there's like a moment where um, Kyle is talking about, wanting to, talking about, the birds and the bees, basically. And he mentions the line that you have all these urges, and then, you know, if you have these urges, then act on them. And of course, that line does not pan out very well. And yeah, that's it. Kind of shows how kind of not a great parents they can be, because their messages, their lessons are not fully well established or realized, or it's just, or because it's part of the story, we got to have poor parenting. And that's another thing, because it brings up the idea of nature versus nurture. It's like, is this because, and we do see instances where Brandon is talking to himself, it starts chanting language, this unusual language, the symbols that he keeps writing, scratching down in like his notebook, and we don't exactly know his backstory. And there's nothing like in the alien technology that's supposed to say, you know, he this is what you're supposed to be doing. Though we do have some hints of it, but or maybe I think I might be going back on that. But yeah, we don't know. We really don't know what his backstory is. He just happened to be fall on Earth. That's about it. I think because it tries to bank on the fact that this is an evil Superman, that where Jor-El sends Clark Kent because the planet was dying, and you know have to need to save the save the world or save the planet, treat everybody right, and this is the opposite. So maybe that's what they were banking on. But yeah, I kind of wish there was more like instances where they become more of a family, like maybe even see him growing up a little bit earlier. Have him when Brandon was a kid to kind of get that relationship down, rather than the montage. I feel like the film could have been stretched out to 30 minutes, like 30 minutes longer to establish it, and at least kind of explore how Brandon views things based on how he sees the world, how he sees people, who sees other people, and we kind of get a little bit of that, but not enough to really warrant his turn. And that's because, again, the nature versus nurture. Is it nature for his species where he comes from that's turning him into evil, or is it because of how his parents treat him or how others treat him? It's it kind of plays both fields, but not doesn't it's not fleshed out enough to really warrant um, anything meaningful, like any like sympathy or understanding. He's just supposed to be an evil kid eventually later on in the film. The parents are pretty stupid and oblivious. They don't even tell him early on about who he is, and even when they get hints at it, it takes a while before it's revealed who he is, really. And they even locked up the thing in like some trapdoor and stuff like that. So they really keep things hidden from Brandon. Just say you're just a special boy, and of course that doesn't work out very well. Um, in terms of the horror stuff, again, I already you kind of already know what's going to happen, but I like Brandon especially. Again, this Jackson A. Dunn, who does a great job, I think, playing both fields of the nice, innocent yet evil, not unremorseful kid, um, who takes it out on anybody that wrongs him or anything. It's it is very creepy. The mask, while stupid, I mean, it somehow works to add the creepiness to it. What it's supposed to exactly be, it's hard to say on the blanket. I'm sure there's some message it because it's just kind of like this blanket with stitching on it with the eye holes, and that's about it. Um, but I don't know. I don't know if there's like any special meaning to the mask. I'm sure there is, other than the make of the mask. But maybe I just don't see it. I'm sure others have seen it, but there's also some hints about like what he could actually be based on analogy with animals. I won't give it away here, but it's introduced early on in the film. Um, what about the gore? What about the horror, the gore, the deaths? There are some good tense moments. Again, it doesn't exactly pay off in terms of scares, but I mean, granted, I saw this at home by myself during the day actually, and it's not. It doesn't. The scares aren't as prominent, but compare if I saw this at home on this, not at home, but on in the theater on the big screen, it would have probably been a really scary time. Um, and I think I'll pause here actually. So sorry. So okay, sorry about that. How is like the horror, the gore? Like I mentioned, I think the horror that it does have some tense moments. Other times, it doesn't really, because Wade Brandon is set up to be this evil version of Superman, and there are times where later in the film they try to take care of him their own way, like try to end his life, and it doesn't have a great payoff because we know that's because of his who he is, how indestructible he is. Granted, we don't see it from that parent's point of view, but we do see it from um, like there's a moment where he sticks his hand into something he shouldn't have and it should be mangled, but we don't see his parents actually see it. So maybe they didn't know at the time um, that he was indestructible. It's hard to say. Though there are other hints later on in the film that it shows that he is quite indestructible, but they don't really think about it. That's the thing. The characters don't really think or plan ahead for something like this to happen. Um, but back to the horror intense moments, there are some good moments. I mean, there's moments where we see Brandon out in the, floating like a window, and there's like a great moment where the lights turn off. That's another thing. His powers do emulate Superman. But there's a weird power involving him messing with electricity, and that's not explained enough. It just kind of is. Uh, wish that was explored a little bit more, but whatever. In terms of the gore, it's pretty gory. Granted, some of the deaths are off screen, but other times it is very gory. And there were moments where I had to cover my eyes or look away because something happened that I really winced. I really did not want to see or hear it. Um, I mean, I will give you one example where uh, there's a scene in a restaurant where a woman's, kind of closing up for the night, and of course Brandon arrives, and some glass breaks, and it goes, and one glass hits her eye. I hate, hate seeing scenes involving the eye. It's, it's. I mean, there's a reason for that. I'm sure a lot of people hate that. I think for me, it stems to something I seen as a kid um, in a move for a particular movie I saw, which I will get into later. I don't want to talk about it now, but yeah, and there's other gory moments. Other times deaths are kind of off screen at off screen, which is fine, I guess. Um, but it could have explored it more, could have gone further with it. Um, but yeah, um, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest bright spots, or pardon the pun, but the bright spots is some of the gore and whatnot. But it could have been a bit. It could have pushed it a little further in terms of creativity. Um, but regardless, I think it was fine. Um, good enough, good use of colors and cinematography. There's a great dream sequence, but I think because we know this Brandon is the killer, eventually becomes a killer, and of course, it's like who's to stop the unstoppable being? And yes, there is a moment where there could have been a possibility to stop him, but it does not pan out very well. So there's there's not a ton of tension when when it's up against a being as seems unstoppable. Um, Granted, we've had certain beings in horror films like Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger, but I think in some ways they're still human, in a way, kind of human-esque type creatures that could be stopped or could be halted. But with Brandon from a being from outer space that's supposed to be like the Superman that could, you know, the super powered human being, it doesn't really add a ton of tension because we know what the end result's going to be with Brandon, what Brandon's going to do. So that's unfortunate, I think, in my opinion. If had there been something more, or they could have dial it down on his powers or his abilities a little bit more, then maybe there could have been something. But I don't think that's quite here. But it's not for the sake doesn't try. It does it well enough. Great cinematography work, good cinematography work actually, um, with using colors, certain angles, using certain points where we see Superman type S moments, like him floating in the air, high above or low to the ground. Um, but yeah, I think I think ultimately though, I would give Brightburn 3 stars. I think that's fair. It does feel like an average film that's nothing groundbreaking, nothing really to write home about. But it's well produced. It's adequate in its acting. But I think what falters is because it's an hour and a half long movie. This could have been extended to 2 hours to explore how Brandon's viewing the world, or explore his backstory a little bit for where he came from, like who are is the species that he is. Because even in Superman comics, there's times where Clark gets like a video recording about who who his parents are, and we don't really get it here. And you know, I kind of wish there was there, but maybe that's for the best. It didn't. I don't know. It's kind of pick your poison, but I think this is nothing. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's a nice diversion from the typical superhero comic book films that we've seen all the time nowadays. That and is still going. So, I mean, with especially the recent one with James Gunn Superman, the Fantastic Four, the first steps, and then later we're going to have Spider Man and Avengers Doomsday. So it's a nice diversion, like I said. Nothing more, nothing less. But if you like horror and you like superhero genre and you don't mind seeing something like that kind of two combined, then I think you'll have a good time. I think overall you'll have a good time with it for what it is. I don't know if it's something I would rewatch again necessarily, um, but yeah, I think it's a good time regardless. So, what are your thoughts on Brightburn if you've seen it? Leave it down in the comments below. Give a like or dislike the review if you wish. Feel free to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell for any future reviews coming up. And I will see you guys in the next review. Bye.